Perfect. So again, the meeting is being recorded and it will be posted online after the meeting, and all meetings will be posted online afterwards. So what I'd like to do is start today first by looking at the agenda, and everybody was sent a copy, and I've got paper copies here in the room. Does anybody online need any material? I'm not seeing any heads or anything. So what we'd like to do, and then we'll go over the issues of the task force, hear from Representative Sarbini about the kind of the mission behind it. And then everybody will introduce themselves kind of in the context of why they are part of this task force. Then we'll talk about how we'd like to move steps forward in terms of gathering information and resources, look at the timeline, look at the scope of work, potentially discuss definitions, or if we need to move to that part of defining what we really mean, and then start talking about plans for the next meeting and what we're seeing next. Does that sound all right with everybody? Great. So I don't know, Rep. Sarbini, if you want to kind of talk about the concept behind it. If everybody looks at their page 2, it's the issue for the study. Maybe some context behind why you did this.
So yeah, we did this because we see a large impact from corporations purchasing residential properties, in particular single-family homes. We think the problem kind of goes back to about 2008, after the housing bubble, and corporations, banks, other things like that saw an opportunity and decreased values of property and being able to purchase them, and as the values increase, make money off of them. So we wanted to kind of see what the landscape looks like now, because you see news stories and stuff, but it's hard to get a full picture of the data. And so we want to see what the data looks like and try to make recommendations as to how we can best, not necessarily slow corporate ownership, but we want to make sure that people aren't being left behind, that people are still able to purchase homes, can afford to, and that they can create generational wealth with that. And ultimately, it's about making sure that people can live and maintain their own homes and have some dignity in that way. So we thank all of you for being here. We really do. I know myself, Rep. Lindsay, and Senator Heinerson, we're really excited to work on this. And ultimately, we want to start with, how does it look as far as ownership since 2008, purchasing residential properties. And when we talk about these, I want to also specify, and it's also in the next bullet point I have, but these things we're talking about are single family homes, condominiums, townhomes, not necessarily apartment buildings where a corporation owns the entire apartment building. Mm-hmm. You know, we want to see that too, because it does have an effect on rates and stuff like that overall. But at the same time, those are sort of a different entity that we are thinking about, because they get treated a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about, like, you can purchase a single condo or a single townhome in a row or something like that, an individual standing house, those sort of things. Mm-hmm. What does that look like as far as corporate ownership over that time period? Let's see where else. Yeah, and that includes foreclosures too. So we know foreclosures. We don't know. That's why how we're asking. We're trying to figure out what that looks like for corporations purchasing those, or if they're scooping up a bunch of those when the people could be getting houses at a great rate. So yes, ultimately what we want to see what the data shows is what percentage of homes being owned by corporations has increased, what is the exponential value increase that we've seen of homes, sort of like the purchase costs, because part of the thought process we had in this was corporations are purchasing houses at top dollar, essentially, sometimes above asking price. They sit on them, they rent them out, they leave them empty. There's different ways that they go about it, but they can sit on them for a year or two, turn over the house for sometimes up to $50,000, $100,000 profit. And if they rented it out in the meantime, also maybe profit from the rent. making the rents also increasing rents is a problem with it, because the more these corporations are spending a lot of money on the house, the more they want to get out of it. And individual people too, like if I were to buy a second house and try to rent it out, my mortgage is going to be pretty astronomical at this point between interest rates and the value of the home. And so we want to make sure that we can rein those in and try to sort of, we don't want to lose value in the homes, right? We want to maintain at least, because people have invested in these homes. There are people that actually have purchased at fairly high prices, myself included, on a house that, you're like, well, I have a lot of equity from rolling over the last few years, but I don't want to lose that if the market tanks, if we force corporations to have to sell really quick. And so part of it is we want a step-up plan or something like that for whatever we're doing, so the corporations just don't flood the market with housing and we have another bubble and everything falls apart. So I think I'm getting to where most of our points were.
Perfect.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a little bit long-winded, but yeah.
Oh, no,
That was
no,
really
I
good.
appreciate that, and thank you. So, I mean, I think big picture, the idea behind it is, there's gonna be a lot of research and studying to understand the context that we're in. Then after we have kind of the information about where we are, is then looking at what are some of the options and
Yeah.
alternatives. And there's also, I don't know if you want to mention it, there's also a component of outreach. It said specifically in the bill, obtain input from groups throughout the state affected by the issues. So there might be some, I don't want to say focus groups, but there might be some listening, because obviously what we're affected by in Denver Metro is going to be different than what we see in other parts of the state. We are
Yeah.
fortunate within the team, the task force, that there are some people from some different counties outside of the Denver Metro that are also on the task force.
Well, and that was the big thing too, is because there's a lot of dynamic here between what's in the metro area, your mountain resort towns, and people just anywhere around the state that aren't in a metro area. Like, what is the effect everybody is having from one place to another, and what's the best way to create a plan that can work for everybody?
Right. And then, finally, it's ending up creating a report, that then I guess you get to share with your different
Yep.
colleagues and
And then
teammates.
determine legislation from there and how we fix it. So
Right. Perfect. So with that, I think it'd be really great to then now introduce everyone within that context. We'll start first within the room, and then we'll go to the folks online. And I don't know, if you want to reintroduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Representative Saeed Sharbini. I represent House District 31 in Southern Thornton. I have a lot of working class people who are struggling to stay in their homes, fixed income, retirement, stuff like that. And this issue is really affecting them. So that's why I brought this bill and worked really hard to try and figure out how we can keep people in their homes.
Perfect. Thank you. Kinsey?
Thank you, Representative. Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me on the screen? Okay, great. I'm Kinsey Hasted. I'm the State and Local Policy Director for Enterprise Community Partners. I think I was appointed to the seat of someone with experience in advocating on housing or something like that. So I'm very grateful to have been appointed and to be here. For those who don't know us, Enterprise is a nationwide organization that seeks to increase the supply of homes that are affordable to people living on low and fixed incomes. Our focus in that work is primarily rental, but we do also lots of policy and place-based programmatic work on affordable homes in general, and have lots of expertise and lots of interest in how hard it's become for folks to be able to affordably buy or rent a home and then stably stay in those homes. And my policy colleagues across the country at Enterprise have also identified corporate ownership as a significant factor in what's going on. So I'm really pleased to be here and looking forward to working with you all.
Super. Thank you. Cynthia?
Sure. My name is Cindy Braddock. I'm the Boulder County Assessor. And what I bring to the table is the work that the assessor does, which is we discover, list, value, and classify and value properties throughout the whole state. So every county has an assessor. 2 of them are appointed. The rest of us are elected. And we're all about data. We're all about properties. We keep probably the most comprehensive ownership databases in the state for each of our counties. And we have we have a lot of customers, but two major customers. One are residents and property owners, and we've heard from them in spades this year because values skyrocketed. And with deep concern, we've heard from them because people are really gonna be hurting when the tax bill's
We're gonna go back and try.
Yeah, thank you.
What are your plans for the weekend,
I'm
Representative?
just gonna just chill on the Capitol.
Yeah, good. Sounds good.
No,
Sorry.
appreciate it. And our other major customer is the county treasurer. And in January, we deliver the tax roll to the county treasurer, which then brings the world apart to our property owners, particularly this coming year. So we're here to share data and information and process in the way we can to support this.
Great, thank you. Heidi?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Great. I'm Heidi Agler. I run a company called Root Policy Research. We're a local women-owned business that does housing research. I'm representing labor and workforce. We do a lot of work with working people and to understand barriers to housing access. And I also have a very wonderful economist, Avilia Bueno, who works with me, who is a labor economist. And so we can offer a lot of ideas for analysis and data collection. And I'm happy to bounce ideas off of Avilia as well. So she's really knowledgeable about these issues. We've done a lot of work in the corporate ownership field, mostly associated with short-term rentals. And I'm pretty familiar with studies to understand the impact of those on communities. I also did a fair housing study for the Richmond, Virginia region a couple of years ago. So we work all over the country. Virginia Commonwealth University had done some analysis, and they've got some really nice, I think, product that we should look at about the impact of corporate ownership and buying investor purchases after or during the Great Recession on neighborhoods and the resulting displacement associated with those and evictions. So can help with some of that research as well.
Love that.
Yeah, no, that'll be great. Thank you. And then I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Garner. I am the state demographer for Colorado. We are assigned as staff for this task force. So that's why you've been getting emails and information from our office. We're obviously very interested in housing because as the state demographers, we create population estimates and forecasts for the state, and we need to understand housing and where that fits into it and how competitive Colorado will be in that ability to attract and retain a population. And in the room, we've got others from my staff. So we've got Nancy Gideon. She creates all of our population estimates and housing estimates. So she has a great deal of expertise in that area. We've got Greg Totten. He is an economist, and he does our economic estimates and forecasts. So he's really looking at how does the economy drive our need for housing and the types of people we get. And then we've got Adam over here. He is one of our data analysts. So he is a guru with data manipulation. He runs our website and he does all of our outreach. So that's who we are. Let's go online. And I'm sorry, Lori, your face is the big one in the middle right now. So Lori DeCrow. Sorry, we've got two Loris. So Lori DeCrow, if you would like to go first. Unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lori DeCrow. I work for the Division of Property Taxation, and we are in DOLA. And we collect and analyze the data that Cindy was referring to from the 64 counties. Prior to coming to the division, I also worked in the county for 20 years doing sales analysis and specifically for residential properties at times and vacant land. And I also hold a certified general appraisal license.
Super, thank you very much, Lori. And let's now go to the other Lori, Lori Mitchell.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Mitchell. I'm the Chaffey County Clerk and Recorder, and I believe I'll be able to help with gathering the data for the research. And my community is really struggling with housing and workforce housing. And so this is something that I think is very worthwhile. Thank you.
And then how about Karen? Can you unmute yourself, please?
There we go. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, sorry. I'm Karen Miller, and I'm very happy to be working with all of you. This is a really great and worthwhile project, so I'm very pleased to be a part of it. I own a mortgage company in Fort Collins, Colorado. I service mostly northern Colorado, however, I do service the whole state. I have served on the Affordable Housing Board for the City of Fort Collins, and I am very, very concerned about the cost of housing up here is skyrocketing and becoming extremely unaffordable. And it's definitely a huge, huge concern. And I've only actually fairly recently become aware of the issue of corporate ownership, making that even more difficult for the normal homeowner. So I think there's a lot to be covered there. I have over 30 years of experience in real estate and mortgage, and have a pretty good sense of what's going on in our part of the state anyways, and I hope that I can contribute in ways that will be helpful to this project. Thank you.
Super, thank you. How about now Leah Dirks?
Hello, I'm Leah Dirks. I am the president of mortgage and consumer lending for First Bank. We are a $25 billion bank, privately held, mostly headquartered here in Colorado. Most of our footprint is also here in Colorado. As president of mortgage and consumer lending, I manage all of our back-end underwriting, pricing, fulfillment teams, but I also really lead a lot of the strategies related to how well we're serving our community, and specifically low to moderate income borrowers, and also thinking about CRA and fair lending implications. So obviously happy to be here, happy to be involved. I'm also an advisory board member for the Colorado Bankers Association. I'm a board member for Colorado Housing Assistance Corporation, or CHAC. And I'm also a board member for Colorado Mortgage Lenders Association as well. So thank you for having me.
Great, thank you so much. And then how about Frankie?
Yes, good morning. I'm Frankie Cole. I'm also here on behalf of the Colorado Bankers Association. I'm the Chief Credit Operations Officer for A&B Bank. We are a community bank, about $3 billion in assets, headquartered in Denver. I actually live in northern Colorado, so close to Karen there. I'm in Windsor and primarily work out of Fort Collins. I'm also our company's CRA and fair lending officer, so I spend a lot of time on community need and low to moderate income borrowers in particular. And then I have served for almost 4 years on the Loveland Affordable Housing Task Force. I've been involved with Mercy Housing on their partnership council. And I'm also the current chair of the Windsor Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. So affordable housing is a topic I care about deeply, and it's a complex topic. It requires a lot of analysis, and I'm glad to see or be part of this group as we look at the corporate homeownership issue as part of that overall conversation.
Super, thank you so much. And last but maybe not least, here, do we have Senator Hinrichsen on?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. I'm Senator Nick Hinrichsen. I represent Pueblo, working class community that has been impacted by this. Pleased to be a member of this, and excited to get going.
Great, super. And are there any other participants that it could be? Teo may be available, I don't know. I'm pretty sure he's on an airplane. All right.
That would be a problem.
Well, it was funny, he said
Yeah, right.
and I was like, I don't think you can do that. But he said, no, give it to me and I'll be on the plane. All right, you do you.
Participate via text message, maybe?
Great, so I think that's everybody, and I do want everybody to be aware that it is a public meeting, and so there are, it's like maybe 8 to 10 people online, Adam, that are from the general public, so just, and we will try and do this, well, not try, we will do this, as we have meetings in the future is make sure that the general public has the ability to be on there. You can also see our illustrious leader for at least our office, Bruce Eisenhower, is also online. He is our legislative liaison for DOLA. So he's worked with Rep. Sharbini on this effort, and I don't know, he may be the one responsible for why this ended up in my shop. Yeah. Look, he's giggling. Nice.
If it's a blame thing, it's definitely Bruce.
All right, well, great. Well, thank you very much for introducing yourselves. And I think what we are really fortunate to see with the membership is how much depth we have in this task force in terms of data and understanding, research and analysis and skill sets that everybody brings to the table, as well as a pretty wide breadth in terms of the state, in terms of that representation. Sorry, I'm just checking. There was someone waiting to be let into the building. Can one of you go downstairs? Adam, you step here, please, if you don't mind. We'll have it. Sorry, I need you to stay by the computer. His name is Nick, but I think he needs to be a general.
Is he a senator?
Lucas Hagan.
And
he's not on our list as a.
he's not a
Panelist
or on the task force, but.
Correct. So maybe just chat a little bit with him and see what the deal is. Thank you.
You're gonna be the muscle?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
See how that goes.
Yeah, no, so we're still in this weird situation with public buildings, state buildings, that ours is still locked down. So you can't come in, and so it made it hard to make it a public meeting.
I keep card works in the Capitol. Would it work here too, or no?
You could always test it. I
didn't get to. She opened the door before I had a chance.
Well, actually, you would have to, no, because we have to use a number. We have to type in a number.
Yeah, so if it is a member of the general public, is it allowed that they are allowed to be physically present, or do they need to be?
Well, I mean, if they made that effort to come down, might as well invite them in. We just weren't gonna have room for like 80 people, not that 80 people would show up, but, so yeah, I mean, please bring him up.
Bring him up. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
Oh. I think I know who he is.
At least one of yours.
Yeah. Brad and the Minions. No, I think he works with Capelli Consulting.
Okay.
Which does Mary Coddington and Jonathan Capelli. They do housing policy and analysis. I think.
Super.
Sorry.
Great. Well, I mean, again, we've got room, so I think that works. So I do want to go back and look at the issue for study just really quick. And just see if there's any general questions regarding it or comments. But in the context of what we'd like to do is actually, let's go down to the draft timeline. And people online, do you have the copy of the material where you can go to the draft timeline? Perfect. I think I saw some heads. Perfect. And I think everybody here's got it. So this is what I'm kind of recommending in terms of a starting point. And actually, I'll start up at the operational details. So one part of the bill said that we had to meet by December 1st. So that's why we're meeting today. And then it says that we need to meet at least once every 4 months after today. And that there's then a report due by October 1st, 25. So taking that into account, we developed at least an initial draft timeline. What I'm going to recommend is that for the next several months, through either February or March, depending on what you guys would like, really go and do more of a direct literature review, and then collect, like what I'd say, the metadata. So an understanding of what data and information is out there and available, and then identify any additional data needs and any limits of those data. In that process of collecting that information, what we would like to do is send out a Google survey to everyone on the task force that will then ask you for kind of this metadata. What are you aware of that might be helpful in our research? Doing it within that survey allows it to, come into our office. We're able to take a look at it, understand what's there, and at least create this first component, and then come back, depending on your interest, either in February or March. I wanted to use the representative and senator timelines also in context, that that you've got certain things that go on from January to May. Couple times that you're involved with stuff. Not that everybody isn't as well, but find out what would work best for people. I am thinking it's going to take at least January, February to do most of this lead review, because we would most likely do it in-house unless somebody has a recommendation of something else, but we can talk about that a little bit more. Then come back, and I'm assuming that in March, we'll come back and have an idea of a scope of work. What research needs to be done, what data needs to be bought, have a scope, approve the scope, and then hire a consultant to do more of that work. Then during
Just one quick
Yeah,
question about that
absolutely.
metadata survey. I just want to make sure that it would be okay. I would love to share that with the data people in my office. That's okay to have, sort of do a collaborative
Absolutely.
response.
Actually, so Heidi's brought up a really good point. What I do want to know is how you guys would like to be able to look at resource and material gathering. One option is to just post it on our website. So we've created, and I put a link there. There's a website for this task force. We can just post information there. Another option, which has a little bit more flexibility, would be to create a Google Drive, and then we would be able to post all of the metadata information to that Google Drive. Now, I will say that some people don't have access to Google Drives. I wanted to check and see what the task force thought process is. I mean, in this room, does anybody have a challenge with using a Google Drive?
No, and it strikes me at least that would, I don't know why I think this, but it feels like a Google Drive would be a little bit more flexible of a platform to be able to add and review things instead of
Hands
links on a
down, because
website.
then you guys
Yeah.
could actually add stuff.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't just be our office.
Yeah.
Having to add. Does anybody online have a problem or a challenge using a Google Drive as a way or mechanism to share data and information? Okay, looks like we're all okay on that one, so perfect. And then we would come back, this is what I'm hoping, is then during the summer, the consultant would do the research. We would come back maybe end of summer with the findings of the research, and present an initial kind of report, or at least summary of the findings, to the task force. Then, that's where my planning stops in terms of, then it's almost another year before a report is due. What would need to take place is then any sharing information around the state with other user groups or other focus groups. And then 2 is really talking about legislative recommendations, which will entail time, obviously, and effort. And at that point, it's where I'd also recommend, there is a budget for this task force, is that then we hire a facilitator to be then part of that component. I'm an economist. I'm not a facilitator. And it's probably would be wise to bring in then a facilitator who could potentially bring in, diverse opinions, the diverse findings, diverse, constituents around the state. How does that sound for everyone?
The question I have is, on the sort of listening sessions I don't know if that would happen early on as well, or if that's part of that facilitation, or if you would do some like early meeting listening sessions just to understand there may be some data out there or information that we're not aware of, or to kind of gather some opinions. And then I guess I sort of see maybe that facilitation of the legislative recommendations is a bit of a different exercise than a listening session. That's more sort of a testing the information, sort of vetting the data, the information, the findings, and getting feedback versus a listening. I mean, I guess I think of listening sessions as this is what this initiative is, this is what's going on, what do you think? Really truly sort of a listening exercise.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Heidi. It seems, and I think this is what you're proposing anyway, but just to make sure I'm clear, I think it would be very helpful to have formalized public input at least those two different points. One kind of in the earlier phase where there is an effort to make folks in the public and around the state aware of what we're doing and try to seek their input and concerns and what they hope it would address. And then once we get to the point of thinking through legislative recommendations, having another formalized process where individuals and groups from outside the task force can weigh in with what they would hope to see. I served on the Affordable Housing Transformational Task Force, and when we got to that part was similar. And we were charged with really considering not only information brought before us and what we brought to the group, but the kind of feedback we were hearing from constituents and the public. So I think that's helpful as we make recommendations to the legislature.
Perfect. What about anybody online? If you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you've got any comments online.
If they don't.
Huh?
If they want to go first, they can, but.
I can't. Does anybody have their hand up? I don't see a hand up. All right,
So my thought goes to, I think she's correct, like, having some general input from the public and stuff about what we're researching in the first place, figuring out what the issues are from them, incorporating those into the research, and then again, going back with the recommendations again and saying, these are some of the things that we think can fix this. What does the public think as well, before we actually throw it there? So, sounds great, yeah. But the point I was saying, I think, is the consultant the one collecting the data, where we impart upon them the first part of collecting information from people, and then the, what you call it after for the second part, the facilitator. Would they do it then again as showing the recommendations? Or would you hire somebody else?
I mean, I think that you could do it at both points.
I'm just wondering who we're hiring for that, I guess is the question. Right?
So I'm honestly thinking two separate entities.
Yeah.
Because I think that the researcher would really be a researcher and would be more the data analyst, where a facilitator would really be a facilitator, unless you can find somebody gifted in both.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Do we need a facilitator first to gather some information for the consultant, and then the facilitator again?
So that's a good question. I think for everybody, I'm thinking that during this initial phase of literature review and input from the task force, that would be sufficient initially to create the background for data that is available and the research that we can do in-house. But then the facilitator, if we then took the results of that research and did then some public listening, we could then gather additional information if needed.
More, okay.
Right. I mean,
I would agree, like, I think I would get a facilitator who's good at facilitation, but doesn't know the content material, because then they're not introducing any bias into, and I agree, they do, two different skill sets, but I also think if you can find a good facilitator whose job is facilitation and doesn't necessarily have any exposure to some of these issues, that's probably a little bit of a better process.
Somebody who doesn't own a home, or does, or, I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to differentiate how you would separate that out.
Corporate owner.
Right? Like-
No, I don't know who that, I mean,
Yeah.
there are people out there who just specialize in facilitation, but.
yeah, which
that
is
would probably
actually
be-
one point I would like to emphasize is that when we do this data gathering, in this kind of Google form that we'll send out, or Google survey that we'll send to all of you, part of it will also include, are you aware of researchers? Are you aware of facilitators? Because then we'll create a set of people that then we'll send an RFP to. That way we've got a pretty wide breadth. How about anybody online right now? Any comments or questions on what we've talked about so far in terms of the process?
I guess one clarifying question, I think what you're saying is to seek public comment once in the information gathering and then after the information has been gathered, but is the idea there that you might have additional input as far as the data that needs to be collected if you're seeking public comment at that point, or is that just from this group?
I mean, I think that, in my opinion, is that I think that it's primarily to share the findings, and if there's any additional information, it could come up. We've been reading a lot on this for the last 4 months. I mean, we're pretty aware of what data's out there, and I don't think we're gonna get necessarily new data sources from a public meeting, but I think there could be a different lens that we're gonna be looking, that may come up that we need to think about. I mean, as an economist, what we try and do is look at always both sides. And so certainly our part of the task force is to look at what are the negative impacts, maybe of corporate ownership. But we also need to be equally looking at why does it exist? Why has it happened? As well. So I think that there could be more feedback on the lens side. What do other people think?
I would offer, I think that makes sense. And particularly, it feels important to me to have a point of the information gathering phase where we are hearing from people and groups in large part in response to what Representative Sharbini has outlined the intent of the legislation is, right? Like, I think that when we keep in mind that we are gathering data, we are gathering evidence, we're understanding the landscape with the ultimate intent of making actionable recommendations that are going to serve communities and people in some way. I think bearing in mind and hearing directly from folks in the earlier stages to help provide that lens and hear from them what the impacts they're seeing for themselves and their communities are, even though it's maybe not hard quantitative data, will be important and helpful in a lens.
Yeah, and I would just add, I was thinking about, I don't know the name of it, and I was trying to rack my brain a little bit, but there was a study done on the impact of short-term rentals, economic impact of short-term rentals in mountain communities. And it got a lot of, there were a lot of opinions when it came out. And I think, it's a good strategy to make people aware of, particularly working people too, that, there's, this issue is being looked at, it's being studied. The state hopes to really understand this, both for sort of like from the corporate world, but also the, grassroots world. So that then I think part of the issue with that study was that, nobody knew this was going on. This is really different data and findings anybody, just sort of to prevent this sort of surprise element. I think is good too.
And please, anybody online, feel free to raise your hand or just to unmute yourself. Any comments?
I would just add a comment. I agree with what the last committee member said, and I would think it would be important to make certain groups that are involved in real estate transactions aware, in particular, like realtors associations, lenders associations. And I think there will be a lot of interest. I'm jumping ahead a little bit just in like defining corporations. There's a lot of people who establish S corps for owning one home, right? As opposed to the broad ownership of large corporations or investment funds, things of that nature. So I would imagine there would be a lot of interest in being able to comment on that.
And I'll also state to that point, that's a good point. We did consider that too. We were talking about how people break down ownership and having S corps or single member or just one LLC or S corp for one property and another one for another and stuff like that. How to break that down and make that chain of connection there, as well as large companies that just own them under their one corporate entity. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is something that we had considered in this and thought it might be a challenge to sort of figure out, especially when you talk about individuals who might just have a couple properties and making sure that we don't lump them in with large corporations and stuff. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
I was going to make a comment that, and then going forward, if there was a way that we could come up with how we index certain transactions, so this research could be done easily, you know, for the future.
Right. I mean, that's a really good point in terms of setting a structure up to where then we've got the data more easily available.
Yeah.
And replicable. That's a really good point. And make it easy for the assessors.
No, there's going to be a lot of data because it's a lot of years, and we get that. But we think we need a big picture of what's happened since the housing crisis, and these banks and corporations were allowed to start really moving in, or really did decide to start moving in heavy, and what it looks like over time until now.
Can I ask a end of the process question? Is your office responsible for the final report? Like, will you all be in charge of writing it and putting together the data and the policy recommendations into the formalized document that goes into the world?
I am hoping a consultant will actually do that piece, but I think we'll be responsible for making sure that it happens. And contracting that component out. Is there another question? Is there a behind the question?
No, I think, well, I think thinking about allowing enough time at the end of that process then for your office task force members, Rep. Charbini and Senator Heinrichsen, to review drafts of that. You know, Heidi has done similar reports, and I think it's making sure that at the end of this time period, there is good time for those of us who've been involved to really review what's going in there, and make comments and come to consensus on what goes in and how it's framed. Because I think that will be one of the most enduring documents of the task force, right? And what people will reference back to and the legislature will go back to. And so I think just bearing in mind at the end that we will all want to be mindful of agreeing to what goes in there and how it's presented, both in the data and the policy recs, but kind of the overall framing, because it can be a charged issue, I'm sure, right? So.
No, I think that that's a really good point. In terms of looking at the agenda and what I had wanted to talk about, really looking at the draft timeline as well as the scope of work, or I don't know the legal or issue for study. Is what it was called in the. I'm like, whatever that meant.
Some other lawyer wrote
it. So looking at the draft timeline, I appreciate your comments, because I don't know what kind of time it takes to do some of that last part. So that's why I kind of I'm like, all right, here's the end. I don't know what time it takes to compile, write. I mean, I'm assuming on the research side that can actually be done earlier. And so it will be taking pieces of that to put into maybe the final report. What recommendations do you have in terms of timing from your experience with that end?
I would give, I can jump in, I would give probably a 9-month, I think 9 months would be totally adequate for getting a report. And then I might, the only kind of challenge with the compiling the report August and September 2025 is that's a tough time to wrangle people because you're hitting people coming off of summer. And so if you could get like a draft report from a consultant in the spring, of 2025, even maybe a little bit earlier. So let's say if you, July 2024, there's this initial research findings, then a research firm gets started. And you have like a deliverable like February 2025, then the task force has time, I'd give sort of 3 months for a review.
I mean, we have to meet every quarter, so it might be best to like put a goal for each quarter.
That would be a good idea, yeah. With an obligation, sort of a commitment from all of us that between, one meeting to another that we have read and commented on the report.
Yeah.
I facilitated the eviction, what do we do about evictions for the governor during COVID? And the challenge we had was, it was a really short time frame, so we only had like a month and a half, I think, but the challenge was providing the report in a form that everybody could access, easily. And so everybody's a little bit different with technology and like comments or redlining, like how do they comment? So I just think maybe adding a little flexibility as well.
Yeah, and I trust and appreciate what Heidi is saying. I've also been in situations with incredibly short timelines and like, yeah, so it's nice to have a longer time frame and to be able to plan for, and know that we'll have some time to give it some thought and not feel totally rushed. So if we have those quarter meeting goals and review, that would be wonderful.
Only challenge from, I'm sorry, just from hiring a consultant, and I think there you'd have a lot of university interest in this, just knowing that sometimes it's harder to get under contract. It's harder for them to get under contract, and you've got just holiday breaks, and so just allowing adequate time.
Oh, I know.
For that
I
reason
believe me.
too.
That's the piece I panic about. Okay, so if we push, I mean, I like the idea of having goals for each quarter. If we push at having like a draft report in the spring of 25.
Yeah.
That would give plenty of time, I think.
And I know you had said maybe I would say even Q2 of 25 would be okay. Selfishly, considering the legislative session falls.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But especially if we happen to meet like earlier in the middle of that time period.
Right.
Gives plenty of time for folks to review and provide comments, even if they were taking a 2-month vacation.
Are you saying something?
No.
You get those?
Just desirously.
Anybody online with any comments on the draft timeline? I mean, I think the only recommendation right now is to really move up the having a draft ready by Q2 of 25 for then adequate time to review and comment. Anything else from anyone? Senator Hendrickson?
I was just going to say, I like that timeline. I think that does give, adequate time for input and adjustments before it's finalized by our statutory deadline.
Perfect. All right, what about now going back to anything in the issue of study? You guys are making it through the agenda much more quickly than I had anticipated. I was using another committee that I sat on as like a guideline, and you guys don't talk as much as some other folks I've been around. So looking at the scope of work, thinking about, again, we're going to ask you for ideas on data, But also I was thinking that it might be interesting to have presentations from different entities, because one of you mentioned that some of it is a way that we can use this task force is to actually help educate the general public on the scope of this problem. And so having, it could be a real estate entity, it could be mortgage, it could be people that are somehow tangentially or related to corporate housing, or what I would call more investor-owned housing, come and give presentations. So going to ask for feedback right now on, do you think that there's anything maybe missing or that you would really like to highlight in terms of the issue for study, and or a presentation that you would like to at least start thinking about so we can start connecting with people?
I have thoughts.
I have thoughts.
Yeah. So I would love to have presentations from folks. That was one of the things I was thinking about. If I do really like the idea of a Google Drive and having you all uploading things we can review and being able to contribute, but having more interactive discussions along the way seems really helpful to me. A couple, in addition to what you offered, Elizabeth, I would love to hear from some, external researchers and analysts who know the data that's available and can maybe share a presentation to help us understand what is getting posted to the Google Drive, to discuss it, ask questions. And I think particularly from a public transparency and information sharing perspective, having folks like that come in, whether it's folks that Heidi works with or the Colorado Future Center, for instance, and like posting their presentations to us on the website that you all have created, I think would be very useful. I also would really like to hear from impacted communities and individuals on the other side. So hearing from folks who are directly related or invested in corporate or investor ownership who are doing that work, but also hearing from community-led organizations and folks who can tell us what their experience has been like trying to, or trends that they're seeing. I have to think a little bit on who makes the most sense, but I also want to make sure that we are hearing from impacted communities on that side of folks who've been negatively influenced by increases in investor ownership.
Perfect.
Or have seen their members be negatively impacted.
So in that, oh, go ahead.
I know there are several cities around the state of Colorado who have started imposing different laws on these corporate properties. And I think we could maybe get some information from them on, I think Steamboat Springs was one of the most recent ones to do it. I think if we could get some information from them on what did they consider, what did their commissioners consider, what did their city councils consider, what data did they receive to help them determine we're going to impose these lodging taxes, we're going to impose these requirements. That might shed some light from a property ownership standpoint, like Cindy was talking about. The assessor's office has the ownership from the clerk's office that Lori works with or works in. That might help us to gather some analysis from that standpoint as to what they considered for the laws that they are now implementing.
I think that's a great idea. And I think we should also just gather for reference all of the local laws that have been imposed throughout Colorado to address this issue already, and just kind of summarize what that looks like currently before we consider a state overlay on that. I think that would be important.
I was going to make another comment about just gathering the data and doing the research. I'm going to reach out to all the 64 counties and the clerks. We all have different, databases and vendors who we use for our recording systems, and some might, be easier to work with than others. Sometimes there's a charge for some. I could try to gather information on all the 64 counties to really ask them if we were looking for this information, what would be the easiest way to do it. And then I'll put that in the Google Drive so we can go on with our research from there. But I think that's a good starting point, because we just need to know how each county indexes and how we can find this information efficiently.
Lori, it might be something worthwhile as well, talking to the vendors for the clerk's office and the assessor's offices. You had mentioned set up some sort of an index title for these types of properties. It might be worthwhile to talk to those vendors to help us with that as well going forward.
Yeah, and I think that'll come from the clerks, but yes, we can certainly do that. And I think we have some issues where we already have too many doc types and things like that, and that might be part of the conversation where we're going to limit that going forward.
There is there's a consolidated database of assessor's data that a commercial vendor provides. That it's expensive data, you can buy it. We've worked with it. It's been a couple of years, but we don't own it. We worked with it. Our client bought it for us, and we worked with it, but we don't. We didn't retain it. But I can give you the contact information. I just don't know off the top of my head what it's called.
Right. So I've heard the same thing.
It's expensive.
And
it's
know
about $10,000 I think purchase.
And know that the task force does have a budget for buying data.
For data. Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the data?
I didn't work with it initially. My business partner Molly did, but I can ask. And I think it was pretty easy to work with. We had a really quick turnaround for that. And so it's just expensive, but I think it was pretty, but I will double check. I can double check and get back to you.
Can you give me an idea of what was on the data, what the data actually was? Only because my office has a lot of data from the 64 counties. And so I'm just curious if there's something we could pull from my office versus paying additional fees.
Right. Yeah, I will. Again, we don't possess the data any longer, but I will. I can have a verbal sort of report back on the composition of it when I get back to the office.
Great, thank you.
Question, Lori, maybe you can help me with this. Every year, the assessors give all their sales data to the state auditor, and those sales files come back and we compile them into one big sales file. That's something we could share, but again, it's limited. So it's sales information, owner, when it's sold, what's the instrument name. So that's another thing we could provide.
Cindy, I absolutely was thinking the auditor would be a great reference for the sales data specifically.
And the issue with that again is getting it all in alignment. Mm-hmm. What we call something, another county may not call it the same thing. So there's a data cleaning and alignment process, but the data's there. And that's probably what the vendor provides. But they may have done some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, no, but I mean, if we can look at ways that we can leverage what we have versus having to buy, obviously that helps us acquire more data. But it is interesting. I've played with assessor data over my career, and it's the same thing. It's like if you know one county, you know one assessor file.
Right. They're all different.
They're all different names, different. It's so funny, but I get it. I mean, it happens. Anybody else? So what we will do is be sending out this Google survey, where then it'll be easier maybe to respond to some of these questions. So then we'll be able to consolidate that information and also put it in the Google Drive.
And in our community, we've got the University of Colorado, so I can reach into the university and see if there's any researchers who are involved in that. We have some research hubs where they reach out to researchers. Yeah. So I can find out who the hub owner is.
There you
get
go.
You some information.
Perfect.
I think I have another bill that I'm gonna try to use at the university, like an actuarial study organization, so like, I know they can do studies and collect data and stuff, so maybe that could be a collaboration we have with them or something like that.
Okay.
Who wouldn't trust the college?
You know, it's funny. So we've worked a lot with with universities over time, and there's benefits, drawbacks, right? Benefit, totally, you like to support local researchers. Drawback is overhead and timing.
Yeah.
Yeah, takes a while.
So it's,
If you have to do, if you're doing any sort of surveying, you have to do human, what's it called? The
yeah.
clearance,
What is
human
that called?
behavioral, yeah.
Yeah. Clearance for doing any,
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, sometimes that's
Yeah.
I don't anticipate it would be a barrier here, but
right now, hopefully, we're not talking to any people.
I'm just talking
The
to data.
Just data. Just talking to the data. Anything else that came up in terms of looking at the issue for study that people have questions on? Just checking online to see if I see any hands.
I have a couple, but I'll wait.
I don't see anybody.
Okay. So we did an analysis recently of Summit County's assessor data for a study we did, and one of the things I ran into, and this might be jumping ahead to what is meant by corporate, but you can have one owner with several LLCs, and I don't know if there's a way to, especially if they have different mailing addresses, so you could have like family ownership and somebody lives in Pueblo and someone else lives in Oklahoma. Sometimes it's the same LLC, sometimes it's a little bit different, but it's really hard to aggregate those.
And that was what we were anticipating, was that
Yeah.
would be difficult. So what we were talking about with corporations is we're trying to get the numbers right now, because if it's owned by a corporation, it's probably not a property that somebody lives in. It could be, right? And so we need to delineate that in the future. Do they actually live at the property where the corporation owns it? But we want to just sort of see the picture of what's the percentage, what that looks like in what areas, what demographics suffer the most. Do corporate entities own these properties more than people, right? And so that, I think, is the differentiation we wanted to make was, is it just owned by a corporation right now? We need to delve into the idea of like, how many of these are actually commingled, or do we need to create legislation that says you need to, if you buy a corporation, recognize, or if you use a corporation to buy purchase a home, you recognize or mark somewhere that you have other corporations that own homes too, and how many total you have, stuff like that. Those are thought processes for legislation, stuff like that. But to get there, yeah, we know that right now that's going to be incredibly difficult to lock down who owns what if there's several corporations for like one person, right? So, you know, we want to see the picture. We'll be able to tell the ones that are similar by like the big companies that buy them all under the same company umbrella sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you're not wrong. Like you make a very good point, is that information needs to be delineated later. And do we get to a point of saying it's so hard to do, we need legislation to make it easier?
The other thing that is a challenge, and I would assume most rural communities, is PO boxes. So we had a hard time. It was really messy to try and figure out the mailing address versus, do you live in this property?
I have a couple clients that live in the mountains, and it's a hard thing to do.
I think maybe a third of our properties were PO boxes, and so it was.
Which are legitimately the address for where they live.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Right,
Yep.
and so that's all they have, and so that's another thing, is like, is that PO box in the same area where that property is located or something like that, or, you know, trying to find out how many of them live together or whatnot, like, because I mean, I could also just go buy a bunch of PO boxes and do it.
So we did a lot of what we call fuzzy matches, where you're trying to figure, you know, that you're using GIS analysis to figure out the occupant, because the county roads, that's the other piece in rural areas, is the, it's hard, the assessor data aren't always coded properly. It could be like Elk Lane and then LANE and then Elk LN, and the data, your algorithms aren't going to be able to match those. So it's a pretty, it's a little tricky. So leaving plenty of time for that. The other question I had is on, do we care about the use? So by corporate ownership, are we meaning corporate ownership, and given the definition of corporation, whatever that means, but do we care about if it's short-term or long-term, or how that property is being
the timeline of ownership.
occupied. Yeah, does that matter?
I think it should. It may have been something that we didn't put in here, but in my mind, I was thinking about, you know, what we're looking for are quick flips, right? Flips within a couple of years or so. Corporations that are just buying properties, waiting for the value to go up a bit and then selling it to make some money. Also, which ones are becoming long-term rentals, short-term rentals, those are important too. They are having an effect on the market. And so, yeah, I think, you know, we need to see the timeline of ownership as well. Like, I think that should be part of the data is this house was owned, like somebody bought it, you know, 20 years ago or 2008 or 2009, the company bought it and then they sold it in 2010, but then maybe bought it back a few years later or bought different properties around the area or something like that.
Okay.
Like, what's the timeline of the ownership? Because if I bought a piece of property under a corporation, but it was mine to live in and I just did it to protect myself, whatever, separate taxes, whatnot, then, you know, it looks different if I lived there for many, many years. But at the same time, you know, I've owned houses under my own name and we've moved every 2 to 4 years. So,
Right.
you know, it happens with individuals as well. But if these corporations are just constantly flipping houses, essentially, we want to know that.
Okay.
I think use is a
Could I
really
ask
good. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask a clarifying question to understand what was just said. You said the main intent is to look for fix and flip investors. Is that
Not
correct?
fix and flip necessarily.
Yeah, price
No,
acceleration.
not fix and flip necessarily, just price increase sales. So like if I bought a house at the top of the market in 2018 and then in 2020 or 2021, I saw how much they were escalating in price and I just decided to sell it. I didn't really make many changes, get permits for stuff like that. We're talking about just a timeline of sale like that. Fix and flips are generally just a couple months and those look a little bit different. And then you also invested a value into the property that you're getting back because you fixed it up. So maybe there's a differentiation there we need to look at as well.
Yeah.
But it's a good point. But because those are a bit different entities. Those are people who are renovating a house and then selling it again versus someone who's just purchasing it, waiting for the value to go up by sitting on it or renting it out at exorbitant rates and then selling it later for the profit as well as possible rental profit.
Okay, so and then your concern would not be so much like real estate investors or individuals who are people in Colorado who are doing that for an investment purpose, but you're looking more for large publicly traded corporations that are doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah, like, you know, we've tossed numbers around as far as like because when we talked about some of it, it was instilling something that created sort of a fee for owning too many houses or something like that so that it would disincentivize the behavior. And so when we're talking about small mom and pops, we were throwing around numbers anywhere from like, do you own up to 10 or do you own up to 30 or whatever like that, you know, trying to put a cap like that for making sure that we preserve the small mom and pops. You know, they're not really influencing the market like that. It's these large corporations that are buying swaths and then just holding, flipping and doing like that without really, you know, putting anything into the property or actually helping the community in any way or anything like that. They're just really there to make a buck.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I think that kind of narrowed scope is important for us all just to have clarity.
Cool.
Clarifying question on that. Sure. I mean, is that a narrowed scope or is that in making sure that that's a component?
Part of inquiry.
Little column A, little column B. I think it narrows it in the sense that like we're not trying to eliminate small corporations or small people or not small mom and pop, I should say. Those kind of things where like, you know, if over the years I've invested and been able to save up and purchase, you know, up to 3, 4, or 5 houses or something like that as a person but those houses are under corporate entities for rentals, you know, we don't necessarily want to deter those people because it's somebody who's trying to make income for themselves and they're, you know, not necessarily buying up huge swaths or trying to drive up the price of the neighborhoods. These companies that come in and buy many houses. I mean, there's articles where you read where some companies come in and buy anywhere from 50 to 100 houses over like a couple weeks. And so when you buy that kind of volume, you start to really push the values in a certain direction, especially if you keep topping out at the end of the market or topping out the price for purchase, because what you're doing essentially is creating the comps for other houses that is going to raise the prices.
Right. So I guess I'm sorry, I should have been clear. Are you only interested in those flips? Or what about if there's a large entity that comes in and buys 100 units and holds them?
Just taking them out of the market.
And
Well,
either taking them out of the market or just owns them
Mhm.
outright and uses them as rentals. I want to make sure that we're not, if you intend to narrow the scope to just the flips, or if we mean any large ownership.
pretty much any large ownership. It's not necessarily just the flips. I
Okay.
thank you for that.
Perfect.
Because yeah, that's the point. It's just large ownership. If you own an exorbitant amount of houses or townhomes or condos or something like that, you're preventing people from being able to buy like condos with starter places or townhomes with starter places, or, a long-term home for a family to invest in and have their nest egg in so that they can eventually have generational wealth passed down. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to promote. And so if you're a large company, even if you're holding them for an extended period of time, you're still preventing people from being able to purchase.
May I make a comment building
Please,
on, I think building off of what you're saying, Representative, it would be helpful, particularly in the beginning of the data inquiry, to not narrow the scope of our understanding yet. If that's
yeah.
right. I would think that it would be helpful to if we're looking at corporate ownership, large investor ownership, I think to the extent that we are able to understand, how many homes are owned in some way by that, and I don't know if it's possible, but if we can differentiate in some way, to some degree, between very large investors and the homes that they own and the data that we see on smaller mom and pop ownership, I think it would be helpful in moving from there after we more fully understand the
context,
landscape,
And
to figuring out the interventions.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
So that's why it was put as just corporations ownership. It was like, let's see what the total corporation ownership looks like, and then narrow down to find the players that are doing like that.
Okay.
That's the way to put it. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could add
yeah.
something. So I know Proposition HH didn't pass, but we are about to go into special session. Part of Proposition HH had a component for primary residence, and that was going to be tracked, if you will. Assessors were going to have to find a way to determine there was working group, all that set up for it. It might be interesting to follow this special session and see if anything comes out of that to help us. If primary residence ends up being a topic brought up during special session again, that might be something that helps us going forward. I understand we can do corporation ownership searches, but if there is a benefit to the public notifying the assessor that this is their primary residence, the properties that don't do that might be give us something to look at as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And just even it's as a secondary source of data, we can use data from the Census Bureau and American Community Survey that looks at housing by type, by tenure. So these are, we're not dealing with individual pieces of data. We're dealing with survey data. It's aggregated, but it's also gives you an idea on that scope of what's there in that size and size by type. So like whether it's single family or duplex, triplex, townhome type of entity. So that'll be interesting. Anybody else online that has comments on the scope of work and or, what I was thinking of doing is we can continue to discuss concepts under, how are we defining corporate? It seemed like that was still a kind of an area of interest, or any other questions regarding the scope? Anybody online? Anybody here want to further discuss? I mean, what my thought process is the next go around is almost bring like a description and almost like Venn diagram of what could be part of the mess. And it could be actually an internal, like between meeting discussion as well. And definitely utilize our assessors and clerks and folks that play with this on a regular basis.
And if it helps at all, I know we wrote the statute in there. It's 790-102 subsection 10. The corporation means any domestic corporation or a foreign corporation. So any incorporation, in my mind, it also includes partnerships and stuff like that, but any sort of business entity.
Right. No, and again, I think the idea is that we're not concerned with the owner occupied corporate owner.
Yes.
It is really getting into this other concept of a larger number of owners, a larger number of units owned.
Be it rentals, long-term, short-term.
Be it any of those.
Anything, yeah.
Right.
Which I think is, I wanted to say two more things on scope. Just putting in a plug for Heidi's point on use. I mean, that's what, whether it's a short-term rental or a long-term rental or it's owner occupied, I think there's the issue of housing supply and how much supply do we have versus how many people. And then there's the issue of matching use of housing to the need that exists in the community. And so, particularly the ability to short-term rental, long-term rental, or owner occupied, I think would be very useful information to have as part of this when we think again about the outcomes. And if there's a whole bunch of homes that are owned by a massive corporation and they're all being rented out, 30% under market rate, maybe that has a different impact on a community than if all of them are being rented out on Airbnb for, extraordinary amounts of money. So just the use part seems important as we keep discussing. And this may be a totally obnoxious thing, Heidi could tell me. But in talking about overlaying ACS data, other census data, would it make any sense? I know it says specifically identifying by geography based on zip code. Would it make sense to identify by census tract instead of zip code?
It depends on
Or
what.
is that just obnoxious?
Well, Elizabeth can talk about that in terms of when you're talking about the PUMS data, it's a PUMA, it's not to dig really deep with the ACS data, you're looking at a geography that's not census tract or zip code.
Got it.
It's called the PUMA, it's a statistical geography.
Got it.
So I would be light on geography and let the data drive
What can happen with it?
yeah,
Okay.
I think you need to be flexible with that.
And that was kind of our idea, is like
Makes
see
sense.
where the data takes us as far as where the corporation's actually buying most of the houses, what zip codes are most affected that way.
Yeah, no, it is interesting reading the research, because if you read the research, they do talk about zip codes a lot, because I think that they are getting the transaction data and can identify the tracks. But then when you're looking at the census data, you're looking at a different level. So I think we will have to play with geography. But there is some fun, interesting research on how a lot of the corporate entities are targeting zip codes.
Which zip codes they're targeting.
And so I think that that'll be really, in a dorky way, fun to look at, is how is that happening? Where is it happening?
That sounds really helpful.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I just had a question on mobile homes. I'm assuming they're part of the
Those are
inventory here. They're a little bit of a different animal, but I think there's some vulnerability there.
I agree with you.
too.
I don't disagree with you, and that's part of where we go to housing type, is what does it look like? Because with mobile home parks, most of us know, like, the land under it, they don't own where it is.
Yeah.
There's a couple that have worked out some agreements to where there's a cooperative, I guess, where they own it all, but for the most part, they just own the trailer on top.
Yeah.
And so how do we actually associate that? And what we'll do probably is to see the corporations that own the actual land underneath through the titles and deeds and stuff like that, and sort of pinpoint where they're at and what they look like. There's a large mobile home park in my district, so you're not wrong. Like, I think about them all the time in the sense that, like, it's not really theirs, right? again, that's the hard part is, they own the trailer on top, but at any point, if they fail to pay the rent for the land, they'll just be removed and they'll lose their property and stuff. So, how do we associate that? And ultimately, my goal would be to try and get as many people into like actual like condos, townhomes, and standing homes. But I mean, these are the most affordable places to live right now.
Absolutely.
And how do we balance that? So no, you're not wrong. I think that'll be associated in housing type. But I think when we look at it, it'll be like a corporation owns the land underneath.
Yeah, it's like
And
an
then-
animal.
Yeah, and so we'll sort of see that there. So
Okay.
yeah.
And the other thing I was gonna say that, and then I'll quiet, is I feel this, and Representative, this is amazing amount of detail, which is very, very helpful. I do feel sort of a need to have like what research questions are being answered. I think that might ground the committee, the task force a little bit, and then the data minds, people who are working with this data on a regular basis can say, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
Or, that's because this is an amazing way to scope this. I feel like the sort of the bigger picture, these are the research questions that we'd like to have answered through this exercise.
Yeah.
And then that next step, the Venn diagram is, and this is what we think we can do.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah,
think
no, I
that's
mean, that
helpful.
certainly when I was looking through it, I was like, that would be nice, but I'm not sure if it's possible.
And sometimes you won't know until, you're in there, but taking a cue from that literature review and knowing what others have done is.
Well, and in my mind, I
would
also
be really
take it as
helpful.
if we can't figure it out, if it's something that it's can't do, let's find a way to legislate to collect the data so we can.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something we can fix that way, is get a better picture that way.
Yeah.
But I do like your point in terms of almost taking it up a level and say, what is it that we want to know?
Yeah.
What is that research question? Because that can also be really helpful in helping identify, the level of success for the task force, as well as if we know what the ultimate question is. And we may add that, Adam, we may add that to the to the Google survey. Is, for each individual to type, to weigh in on what is the big question, not like by the detail, but what is the high level
What do
question?
you want to know?
What is it
What's
that you
important
want
to
to
know
know?
more than one.
For legislation.
Oh, absolutely. More than one question is totally allowed.
I like all of that very much. I think it will help. I think that will help focus and guide us. And I really appreciate the point you just made, Representative, and believe there is great value in being able to identify what the gaps in data are. That alone, I think, is a useful exercise.
All right. Anybody else online with any questions, comments on the scope, concerns? So the two sponsors, any questions or comments on the scope? Because what I have is kind of the last task is really talking about what our plans are for the next couple of months. Make sure that we're all in agreement with what those are.
I know we tried to be as inclusive as possible with this list, and we knew that there was gonna be more or some things in here that we couldn't find or something like that, but I think what we've discussed has been incredibly helpful in helping to narrow some of that. So I don't know if Senator Henderson has anything else, but.
No, I agree with that, and I realize that we do have some challenges. There's going to we're trying to assemble some stuff that really hasn't been assembled before. So I want to be cognizant of that, but I appreciate the effort that we're about to undertake and lay the groundwork for what we can do going forward.
Super, thank you. All right, well, if there are no other questions or comments on the current COVID issue for study, then I'd like to just review what the plans are for the next couple of months. So what we plan on doing is send out a Google survey to collect information on a variety of topics from potential speakers, research that you have available, what your research question is, maybe even comments, maybe a comment or two on the scope. Collect that from everyone. At the same time, our office will start a literature review and start posting, create the Google Drive, and we'll have it in different segments on the Google Drive where we'll post different pieces. We've got currently about 8 different reports that we've been reading. We'll post those there because there's 2 really good ones by HUD that I found very, very interesting, that will also lay some groundwork for data. In that, then we'll bring that literature review and information back together. At the same time, also really looking at the data. We'll be looking at the metadata available, so that'll be another piece of the Google survey. What data do you know is available? What's there? What are the components? Identify any other further data needs, any data limits. Also propose a research scope that then could be used as groundwork for an RFP. We'll probably also be collecting information from you guys in terms of, awareness of different consultants that maybe have worked in this area, or analysts that have done work in this area that we could then send that RFP to, because again, the part that's going to be difficult is the timing between meetings and implementation. So it does take a bit to hire a contractor. So I want to try and put things in place before March so that if March won't be the starting time, March will be more the midpoint time so it'll be a little bit easier to bring somebody on board.
So are you hoping to have somebody on board for March? Okay.
Well, I think you guys first need to kind of approve the scope of work.
Yeah.
Before we can do that.
One last thing that came to mind as you're talking through the scope, it might be nice to build in some others. I don't know if this was a vision at this point, but to build in some analysis of what other states, how they have done this, and if it's been effective, or if maybe you all already know that.
No, actually, and that was part of the data gathering we're hoping, was that if there was any other states that had implemented research. The thing was, we're finding a hard time for Colorado, right? So we want Colorado specific data for sure.
Sure.
But if we can see any other tactics or things that other states have done that have given them information or led in a good direction or something like that. But from what we can tell, this is something that, not many legislatures have actually tackled.
The enterprise may know faster than anybody else, but.
Yeah, I'll ask.
And you might want to look at Canada too. British Columbia would be another.
And that was.
Sorry?
No, go ahead.
My office did a study on short-term rentals around the country. It's not directly related just to corporate, but I'll put that on the Google Drive once it's created, the results of that. It might just give us a little indication as to what other states are doing with some of these.
For sure.
And some of the research that I've gathered so far also includes what's happened in other states.
Okay.
So, but I agree. I think that that's a really good plan.
Do you have a ballpark on any states of what they've done, like as far as like how many?
So the one that I'm looking at for HUD, it was actually a regional one. It was the southern region. And, it is some very interesting findings in terms of total percent of housing owned and by like size scope. So it was something like, I want to say 80% of the housing, single family, not owner occupied, owned by mom and pop. 80%.
Yeah.
It's that other 20% that then ranged from 30 to over 1,000 units owned. But then there's also some draft like legislative ideas as well. And I think that that'll be the fun part, is to be thinking about strategies for what happens if things do go south. So a lot of these units were picked up during the Great Recession, during all of the foreclosures. So thinking about, like, if foreclosures were to happen again in massive amounts, what could be done to prepare for that? So some of it are these socially minded REITs, as well as another point to where that if there are these REITs buying up large quantities of housing units, how do you keep the community in mind? So they're interested in kind of more like what you had said before, if they're all owned but then rented at below market, gives you, so it does come up with a lot of different things to be thinking about. Which we'll get that stuff out there as soon as possible and make sure that you guys get notified. Make sure that we have good contact information, or better said, if you didn't hear from us the best way possible, let us know so that we can make sure that we're using the best way to communicate with all of you guys.
For the follow-up with the Google Drive links and all that, I'm sure it's available online, because I had seen some folks get in, but I had been getting texts from folks who were trying to participate remotely over Zoom and listen in, and just were having a little bit of a hard time finding the link. And I probably had erroneously sent them my panelist link. So if you all have Zoom links for what I should send, just for next time, or where we can find it, to just make it as
right. So it is on
accessible.
our website.
Okay, great.
And I gave you the link there. We also share the link in an email, so you can see the webpage. So apologies for that. It will be, again, it is being recorded and we'll post.
People found their way in. I just probably screwed it up, so.
No, that's,
Helping
and it should have been the same.
To get it right, yeah.
It should have been the same link regardless.
Okay.
If you were a panelist, he just converted you to a panelist if you were part of the task force. And actually, that's another good question. Preference for mode of meeting. I know hybrid is hard. Because you don't necessarily belong either way. You know, like you're in a group, then you're feeling like, are you missing the folks online? Folks online are like, hey, are they listening to me online? So I want to know, what is your preference? Do you like online? Do you like in person? Do you like hybrid?
Honestly, I don't think this was that bad. I mean, I feel like online you got to voice some concerns, and this isn't a large enough group, I think, that it gets too outrageous if we split it like this. So
okay,
I'm open to the option, especially for people who have to travel far.
Right.
I have one additional question. We have many people who were signed up as attendees. Do we want to give them the ability to participate in these meetings, or?
Do you want to continue to Zoom just for attendees at least, or?
So what do you mean by that?
So we have
It's 11.
11 people who are online, who are attendees, who do not have the ability to contribute to the discussion. Is that something we want to make possible, to allow them to participate?
Can I offer a suggestion?
Well, I think
I don't know that it makes sense to have public attendees participate at the same level as task force members, but perhaps there's 10 minutes reserved at the end of meetings for a public comment period, and would advise limiting timing of individual public comments to make sure, something like that, so that if people do want to contribute anything and they took the time to listen to us, they have the chance, but there's a clear expectation for how long folks get, and then we move on.
And we were trying to promote Senator, when you went to attendees, he had his hand up. So if you went to the attendees tab and anybody had their hand up, we could do that public comment thing at the end of that. So
The other option is also just allow them to Q&A and submit questions.
Absolutely.
And then we can take time and look at those pieces
at the end. I would defer to folks who have to travel on whether we do in person or Zoom.
Well, I just want to make sure that the people online feel good. Yeah. Did this work for you
Being
guys?
online, I very much appreciate that this was an option. I work in Western Colorado, and so I would not be able to come and attend these meetings. And so I felt heard, I felt included. So I very much appreciate this platform.
Anybody else online with feedback?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think often be able to be in person, but given that my home district is as far away as it is, I'm going to be leaving right after this for meeting with county officials on potential impacts of the special session on them, and it's nice to be able to have that flexibility. So I greatly appreciate it.
I appreciate the format too. I appreciate being able to be online. We're still doing election stuff and we've got a lot of other duties as assigned, so appreciate it.
Perfect. All right. Great. Any other comments or questions from people before we end the meeting?
Great job. It's really informative, and thank y'all for helping push through this. Yeah.
Thank you for doing legislation.
Yeah, thanks for bringing us all together, Representative.
A lot of it came from the fact that I've tried to purchase properties in this environment, and only my primary residence at this point too. Like, I have not tried to purchase anything for renting out or anything like that. And even with good credit score, good income, stuff like that, you're still looking at the possibility of a denial for owning a home, and it's absurd. And in this world, where we really are just trying to take care of people, a big part of it, I think, is giving them safe, stable housing and the ability to create generational wealth that they can pass down to their children and give them a chance to succeed as well.
Yeah, no, agreed. Great. Well, thank you guys very much. Thank you everyone for participating. Like I said, we'll post the recording of the meeting. We'll get the Google Drive and Google questionnaire out to you guys hopefully this week. And if not, by the beginning of next week, and look forward to meeting with you. If any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me so we make sure that we move forward and we're successful on this task force. Great, thank you. Thank you for
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great job facilitating.